A really important section that you need to look at is arrays. Now an array is just a different way of storing information. So we've looked at variables before, which have allowed you to store just one item, whether it be an integer or text or whatever. What an array allows you to do is store a series of pieces of information. So for example, it might be used for a test, and there might be a section for each of the students in the classroom and each of their test scores. So if there's 4 students in the class, there will be 4 separate boxes. So imagine like 4 rooms or 4 boxes set next to one another, and that information is actually used to store the information. So exercise 20, this is probably the main thing you need to do before the exam. If there's a difficulty, please just check with Hamish, and he should be able to just explain that to you. So when you're going ahead, and you can say, so it's a number of sequence of items all of the same type. So you couldn't have one that was an integer, one that was a string, one that was a boolean, which, remembering boolean was true and false. So you have to determine the idea. You can see that here it's got int and it's got the square brackets. If you ever see square brackets, it's going to be talking about an array. So int square bracket list, it's actually going to create a thing called list. That could be bulb or barry or whatever, it doesn't matter, but it's of type integer, so it can only have whole numbers in it. When you're declaring it down here, you can see it's got list equals new list 5 just in this section here, and what that's doing is it's going to be an array with 5 integers or 5 rooms or 5 boxes in it. When we number integers, when we number arrays, we start with 0, so it goes from 0 to 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 will have 5 different things in it. And we refer to it by list and a square bracket 0, or whatever the name of the array is. A square bracket 0 tells you which door or which box it's referring to. So you can see that it's got, if you look at it here, they are referring to them like they're boxes, and you could pop whatever you could in this particular one as long as it was an integer. You couldn't put a string in it, and that's because we've declared it in the first instance as being an integer. So list 0 would refer to the first item in the list, and list 4 would be the last item in the list. And that's one of the things you've just got to be aware of when you're going through and doing these things. You could actually have an array with integers, you could have booleans, so true and false, you could have characters in it, and you don't really use that one, but you could actually have objects which would be null. So you can see on here, objects can be assigned to it, so you can see that it's got list 1 is equal to 46.4, which basically means that the second item, because it's list 0 would be the first item, will have 46.4 in it. You can even use it in things like for loops and if statements, and you'll see it's got total equals total plus list I. Now the I would refer to something that was used in a for loop. Usually with arrays we use for loops, because remember with for loops it allows you to access every single item in the list one by one. So when you've got an item that's there, you'll see it's got, so if you want to, so this one here says to print out items in an array list using the paint method. You've got your for loop that we've looked at before. Now remember what it is, this is your starting point. This is your increment, so it's going up by 1 each time. And then I is less than list.length. Now that's something that hasn't been referred to in the code there, but what that's meaning is list.length is actually talking to how long the actual array is. So in this case it would be 5. So I could have put 5. Now just notice there's a colon there, it should actually be a semicolon the same. If I put less than or equal to 5, it would actually come up with an error for me, and that's just actually what it's talking about a bit further down here. Because the first time through the loop, I will be equal to 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. But if I've got that equal sign, it will go around a 5th time, and because we talked about the fact that it goes from 0 to 4 instead of 1 to 5 in this case, it would come up with what we call an overflow error. In other words, it's tried to come up with something that doesn't exist. So I could have just put I is less than 5, that's perfectly fine. The reason they use list.length is so that what it will do is be able to be used with a variety of different arrays, remembering that list is just the name of the thing, so it could be barry.length, and this could be barry. I, which, remembering Barry I, the first time through, Barry I would be 0. And what that will allow us to do is refer to the first item in the list. The second time through it would be Barry 1, then Barry 2, then Barry 3, then Barry 4. Now, because I've only got a less than up here, it won't go around a fifth time and do Barry 5. If it did Barry 5, it would have an overflow, which is basically what that's saying there. The other error that might come up is this, so out of bounds error just means it's gone too far, it's used something that doesn't exist in the list. The null pointer just says, it's just basically because it doesn't point to one that exists, is all it really means. So some different ways that you can do. You can see that here, what it's doing is it's actually popping in int of list equals new int 5, and it's just a way of doing two things at once, and it's saying, look, I'm going to create a list called integer. Remember, this is our thing that could be Bob or Barry or whatever, and it's going to be an integer based, and it's going to be 5, so 0 to 4. The other option that you can do is you can reload it. When you see the curly brackets, it's always going to relate to an array as well. And so this would be list 0, remembering list is just the name of the array. This would be list 1, this would be list 2, list 3, list 4, and list 5. Then they're just saying that list.length is just allowing us to refer to the length of it without having to put it down. You could also set up different things like a calculation within it if you want. Look, and we really don't, but you could. The XX would just refer to some sort of integer or something like that. Well, it'd have to be, because all of these are integers here, so it has to be declared as an integer. That would have to be defined separately. And you can see there's a whole different heap of things that you can do. This is where it becomes a little bit more complicated in here. So all it's saying is, I want you to have a look at each of these, and it tells you what each of these does, and just go through. I don't need you to put it into BlueJ or whatever it is that you want to use, but I do want you to have a look at it and understand it, and check on it with someone else if you're not sure. So we're saying here that we've set up an integer called A, and really it's not very exciting here, but let's call it Apple instead. Apple. And so that means I've got to change this to Apple here. Okay. So in the initialization phase, I want to load everything up. I've set something up called Apple. That's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. All this array is going to do is take those numbers and make sure that they are actually stored in the array, and add the values together. So it's going to go 6 plus 7 plus 9 plus 12 plus 4. So first of all, I'm setting my total to 0. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a for loop. So you'll see those lots of times in when you're using arrays, and you'll see that what it does is it starts it at 0, and it's going to I is less than apple.length, and the apple.length is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I could have just written in here 5. Okay, I equals I plus 1 is exactly the same as doing that I plus plus. They're no different at all, and you can just choose whichever one you like. So total's initially set to 0. The first time through, total is going to equal total plus, now we have to change that to Apple as well because we did that before, Apple I. Now in this case I is 0, so Apple 0 is 6. So what it's going to do is go 0 plus 6, and it'll put the total into there, so total will now become 6. It's going to come up to here. I will equal 1 this time. It knows it can still go through the loop because it's still less than 5. It's going to be 6 because we totaled it before, plus Apple 1. So Apple 1 is this one, so that'll mean 13. And it's going to keep going around and doing that until it finishes through, and it'll go around, and when it's equal to Apple 4, it'll add that one in, and then it'll try and come around a fifth time, and it won't do it. Okay. And then basically what I want you to do is go through and have a look at each of those exercises in there, and looking at sorting arrays and things like that. Work together to do it, and just try to do it. I'm going to come back and do a separate one on two-dimensional arrays, but just for now I think that will be enough.